I am fortunate enough to be acquainted with persons who are business owners who own farms, etc. And they've explained to me that it's extremely hard to know what to grow due to the ever changing climate, because you might invest millions of dollars in corn per se, and if the climate doesn't um basically suit to that, they end up losing it in the end. I know someone that explained to me that they lose somewhere around $850,000 on an investment with corn. And when I heard that, I was like, and of course, for a business owner, it's nothing because you're investing like millions of dollars. So to come up with that $850,000 deficit, it doesn't seem like a lot. But for the average person, you're going to be like, what? And it's just thinking about how profitable can this be? In terms of the profits that we gain because of climate change, the profits that we lose because of climate change. And so that's extremely important to look at.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash Podcast. I'm your host for today, Gladstone Taylor. And today I have with me one of our fellows from the Climate Tracker Climate Justice Fellowship, the fourth cycle. We have Jaleeza Roberts from Belize. How are you doing today?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm good too. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. So let's get right into it. We've been kind of sharing stories from our fellows from this season, and so this episode will kind of just be a similar thing. But first, we want to kind of get to know you. Tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into journalism, or how you got interested and then eventually started to do it.
All right, so thank you for having me. Most definitely. When I initially applied for this fellowship, I think it was just out of mere curiosity in the beginning. Of course, in high school, I was a science major, but when I transferred to university, I went into criminology and criminal justice. And so that kind of developed a need for seeing justice in different elements of society, understanding that environmental justice is something that's extremely important, but it's also something that is necessary in this era, because in the age of technology, we're getting to a place where we're beginning to neglect the environment. And so my inclination with my love for Earth and my love for seeing the things around me, and of course my heart for justice, they were two things that kind of collaborated together. And so that's how I ended up applying for this fellowship. How I got into journalism is a rather funny story. So before I became a journalist, I was working in business. I was working in sales, and it was something that I would say wasn't too far-fetched for me, because of course sales include marketing, and where I was working before, I was very instrumental in terms of the content creation and the marketing aspect of it. And so I saw the opportunity come up to be a journalist. I saw the vacancy, I applied, and I applied late. And so I did not think I was going to get it, but I firmly believe that even if you're not qualified, even if you apply late, just apply to get yourself out there, to give yourself the confidence boost, right? And so that's basically what happened. I applied, I got the job, and I became a journalist. It has been a rewarding experience. It has been something that has opened my eyes in different ways, to see the world very differently, to understand that stories are important, narratives are important. And so I think a big part of, this climate justice thing, it's really sharing the narratives in terms of how climate change affects not only Belize, but the broader Caribbean and the region as a whole. And so, yeah.
Interesting. Science, I think a lot of the people who have some kind of experience with science find it a bit easier to transition into climate change reporting, or journalism in a sense, because you kind of have experience with it, and Yeah, I mean, there are other reasons for sure. I think scientists, they tend to be a little bit easier as sources to deal with sometimes, as opposed to agencies as well, because they're curious and for the most part, they always kind of want to share things that they know. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's an interesting kind of route or journey into the space. A lot of us have some kind of non-traditional route, so you're not alone in that sense. But I'm glad you stuck with it. Tell me a little bit about your experience applying for the fellowship, and when you got through, and also your experience like these first couple months just kind of becoming a part of a Caribbean network of journalists.
Well, my initial experience is that I thought it was a rather easy application form, but I think it was kind of in depth whereby it was you had to really explain yourself and know how to articulate yourself properly. And so I think that it really piqued my interest because of the entire justice aspect of it.
Mhm.
Of course, being a part of a broader Caribbean network, I'm a firm believer that expanding your networks is the way to enhance your mobility in terms of the way that you are able to maneuver. And so, of course, as much as I am insistent on building my networks locally, it's important to do that regionally as well.
Mhm.
And so I think it's nice to be a part of a broader community. And the more that you speak to other individuals in other Caribbean countries, you realize that we have so many similarities, even though that we're a part of different countries, we're really linked by different elements. Of course, one of those elements being our sociocultural similarities, our political similarities, and of course the never-ending colonial bind that has each of us somewhat connected at a spiritual level. And so it's been quite interesting to connect with everyone. And I am extremely grateful because it allows you to open your eyes to see that, okay, there's more to this than just your country and everyone faces the same things. But it's nice to see that other countries are able to facilitate the things that they struggle with now, and they're able to come up with solutions rather quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and even the idea of journalism itself too, is kind of a tricky space. So having a network, and like you said, not just where you are or your island, but in a regional sense. Um, we definitely underestimate how powerful that can be, because we don't really think about the narrative of climate change in the region and how powerful that makes the network of journalists in the space. But
It's true because like a big part of this what we don't understand is that climate change really affects food security. And so for each of us, if it's not tourism, the second thing we're dependent on is agriculture.
Mhm.
And so in the event that agriculture is not being as productive as we need it to be, there is an economic deficit. And so it's extremely important to look at the ripple effects, or the domino effects, you would say, of
Mhm.
climate change.
Yeah, as you talk about food security, one of your most recent stories, a part of the fellowship, is actually about food security and how climate change is affecting that in Belize. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Okay, for sure. So the story that I wrote on food security, that was a big one for me. And so while I was writing it, it occurred to me because for years I've heard this saying that, okay, Belize is the bread can has the potential to be the breadbasket for the Caribbean or the region as a whole, because land isn't something that we lack here. Um, it's very green,
Mhm.
gratefully. Other islands and other places regionally, or even our neighboring countries, they don't have that luxury that land is really available to them.
Mhm.
And so a big part of it for me was that climate change begins to jeopardize the nation's food security. I am fortunate enough to be acquainted with persons who are business owners, who own farms, etc. And they've explained to me that it's extremely hard to know what to grow due to
Mhm.
the ever changing climate. because you might invest millions of dollars in corn per se, and if the climate doesn't um basically suit to that, they end up losing it in the end. I know someone that explained to me that they lose somewhere around $850,000 on an investment
Mhm.
with corn. And when I heard that, I was like, and of course, for a business owner, it's nothing because you're investing like millions of dollars. So
Mhm.
to come up with that $850,000 deficit, it doesn't seem like a lot. But for the average person, you're gonna be like, what? And it's just thinking about how profitable can this be?
Mhm.
In terms of the profits that we gain because of climate change, the profits that we lose because of climate change. And so that's extremely important to look at. And of course, we've seen it it's inconsistent to maintain yields.
Mhm.
And so when you're looking at things like beans, rice, and of course the corn, like I mentioned, those are staples of a society. But it's
Mhm.
extremely hard to gauge when you would be able to grow the yields, because if it rains too much, it affects it. If it's too hot, it affects it. And so it's pretty hard to find the common ground, especially here where like it's gonna be hot in the morning and then by tonight it's raining. So that's the reality that we need to deal with. In Belize we had this phrase June to November where we would gauge it as hurricane season, but as an adult it's not June to November. As
Anymore.
early as I would say last week it was raining,
Mhm.
and it was raining. And so we're in like February, we're going towards the middle of February.
Mhm.
And so it really puts into perspective of understanding that, is farming really sustainable, and is should it be considered or even treated as the second way a country can make money? The second,
Sustainable.
yeah, because it's just as unsustainable, or I would say volatile, as tourism. We saw it with the pandemic. When the pandemic came, tourism shut down completely.
Mhm.
And so what happens in the event that we can't cut the weather for a year? Will we allow farmers to keep losing? And
Mhm.
how is it that they get funded or compensated when they lose? The government needs to borrow money and give them, or they need to go and borrow a loan. Is this a sustainable way of living? And so that is basically what I was focusing on.
Yeah, this is an interesting subject too, especially because when you think about or even discuss things like foreign aid for farmers in developing countries like ours, we're thinking about larger countries like our nations like the US. And we see in recent times their president has removed them again from the Paris Agreement. So things
Hmm.
like those people who are supposed to be contributing to climate funding and stuff for us, it's like it's not. I mean, maybe we do have to look at other options now. If our farmers are already struggling, and the place where we typically get aid for stuff like this is like one of the places we can't really look so much anymore, then maybe we do need an alternative. Like you said, it's not sustainable.
And I think that the thing is that we're so used to using traditional methods when it comes to farming
mm,
that we haven't been able to venture out into
mm,
other options that do exist. And I think that's a big issue that we face, is that in Belize we're rather reactive than proactive.
mhm,
And so we don't take time out to look at the different types of farming that are available to us. We're still using, the I would say the indigenous ways of farming, but also the original ways that we learned
mhm.
how to farm, that we never learned to adapt. And
Yeah.
then I think for some reason, I think it's a mindset thing that we really have a problem with change, and we have
Mhm,
an issue with adapting easily
mhm.
and quickly. And so instead of trying to adapt, we'll do the same things and be mad that they're not working.
No, we are definitely, I mean, mad as in upset, but we are definitely mad or insane to do the same thing and expect a different result.
You know,
Yeah,
and
no.
so I think that's something to look at. And of course, when you look at those initiatives, it's so important to also understand what are the strategies that we're using to address them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am of the personal belief that if we continue to rely on international funding, that it will only affect us in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Because we saw it when Trump started to do his cuts, it affected so many things
Mm-hmm.
for different countries. And so it's really just something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, did you find anything there, like in terms of alternatives? I know probably alternative farming methods and stuff like that. And it's a lot of countries that are kind of applying things like that these days. But what
Yeah.
were your findings?
Well, in our case, we have agriculture and we have aquaculture
Mm-hmm.
here in Belize. And so, climate change also affects the amount of fish in the sea,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of the fish population and stuff like that. And so my findings, which in terms of the alternative methods, I know that I've seen persons look into a more, I believe it was the
Mm-hmm.
hydroponics way of growing things. That way you can rely on water.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know there are those that they do rotation farming, whereby when it's rainy, they'll plant one thing and then they'll switch to something else when they see it's dry. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a rotation farming. And so
Yeah.
that is something that I found out. And of course, in terms of fishing, I know that we've had to put in some regulations in Belize, some greater regulations and legislation to be able to protect the different marine species that do exist.
Mm-hmm.
In Belize, we do know that there has been overfishing in the past that we are now suffering the consequences of. But of course, climate change, not when animals are so intelligent to the point that when the water gets warmer, they will
Move.
relocate. They
Yeah.
will move, they will relocate. And so we also see that happening on land, whereby you're seeing animals that you weren't familiar with growing up. All of a sudden, you're
Crocodiles.
seeing them. Yeah, all of a sudden, you're seeing them, and it's like, what's happening? But that's the result of
Yeah.
climate change.
Yeah, it's displacing so many. It, it just goes to show because it's changing everything for us in terms of the seasons when we talk about
Yeah,
the farmers and what they're used to. Seasons are integral to how to the ways in which they farm, like the traditional ways, knowing when to plant what, that kind of thing. But it's also crazy because it is displacing literal animals, and it's not just us that it's kind of affecting.
that's
Um,
true, and I think it's interesting when you look at it from that perspective, because animals are instinctive.
mhm,
And so if they feel displaced, or if they, I wouldn't say they feel displaced, but if they need to
move.
move,
Mhm,
and maybe for us it looks like displacement, but
mhm,
they know what to do. It's instinctive.
mhm.
But if they need to move, then where does it leave us?
Yeah, that's a big question right there. It's a big question. You might,
Yeah.
that's probably why Elon Musk is trying to fly out. Cause, but yeah, I mean, even you mentioned too that aquaculture and agriculture are for us people islanders.
Hmm.
It's a big source of food for us. Even the discussion about food security on a global scale, I think that's when you talk about things like food systems and climate change changing those things as well. Talk about indigenous people who have staples that they're not able to partake in the same way because of those things. Um, yeah, what would you say was maybe like the ultimate conclusion of your story that you could share with our readers?
Okay, so one of my ultimate conclusions was that all of the things that we have found, all of the findings that
Mm-hmm.
contributes to inflation and the rising of food prices. And so for me, like I mentioned to you earlier, um, I'm well rounded to the point that I understand how the business world works.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see how nature gets to affect your daily life,
Mm-hmm.
and you link those two things together, that's when you finally understand why it's important to really invest in these things and protect them for the most part, because climate change does end up affecting our rising of food prices in the end. Because and if we're not an inaccessibility to different things create, or I would say like an under farming of certain things will bring up the price. If a market is saturated with something, the prices will go down.
Agreed.
But if a market doesn't have something, then price, it's basically on demand.
Yeah.
And so now the price has to go up and people will pay whatever they need to pay for it.
Right.
And so in the end, what we don't understand is that climate change is a part of a greater monopoly that we're playing with here, especially in the business world. And of course, business affects our daily life. As much as we don't do the bartering system anymore, the truth is that we all work to get money and we get money to get things. And so if we're not protecting these very little things, and some people might see it something as simple as, oh, how is it that if we stop using plastic straws, it's going to save the environment? But you don't understand. You're not seeing the bigger picture. People might say that, oh, how is something, as simple as I turn off my AC, how is that helping the environment? Like, you're not seeing the bigger picture. It's not about seeing the now. It's understanding that we have a mandate to protect for the next generation. And if we have an economy that is completely failing, it's basically our fault because of simple things like that.
Yeah, and all of us have a role to play as well, in the solution, because I think when you look at things like the COP conferences and these large gatherings, or even the Paris Agreement and things where all the countries, or most of the countries in the world get together and say, how can we solve these things? How can we create policies and solutions to the growing climate change and global warming issue? Outside of those spaces, like those larger spaces where it feels like we regular people don't have power, there are roles to play. Like, we do have our own roles on an individual level, like you said, things like figuring out better disposal, getting rid of things like plastic if we can.
And of course, the importance of composting. I think that's something that's a dying art. It's not something that we really practice anymore.
100%. But I think it's a part of that larger role too, where while we're waiting on policies and while we're waiting on governments and even scientists, because that's a large part of it as well, to come up with things and solutions, the mindset of us, the people, has to shift. We have to realize that there is a role that we have to play, so that even when the policies come on stream, in Jamaica in particular, we have a plastic ban on disposable plastic bags. Those policies take time. So that ban it's been in place for quite some time now. People are slowly getting used to it, but then you have more, that policy kind of evolving.
In Belize we have the single-use plastic ban as well. So that was something that was formulated in 2019, and so that was a ban on single-use plastics and styrofoam. And so recently, what I believe the ministry did is that they brought in a machine that could be able to test the ones that they're bringing in now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
No, it's very key, because we have, the individual people. Sorry, my camera cut out for a bit. Okay, I think we should be back. Yeah. Individual people, I think, those roles are essential, because even when the policies begin to change, or when they start to come through, or when the solutions start to happen, these things are going to need support. Like the solutions, like things like conservation areas or protected areas, marine protected areas, and these different things, is going to need support. It's going to need regular people like us to go and visit these places to support them in an economic way, to keep it going, but it's also going to take a difference in mentality so that when things like the policies come on stream from the government, people have a respect for, just like you said, how important it is and why we do need it. Um, but yeah, it definitely is a larger issue that we all have to come on stream to solve. And as journalists, we play a huge part. So stories like yours are super important in bringing that understanding.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything else that you might want to share from your experience of reporting on this thing that maybe people may not know that you would like them to know?
Um, well, I think a big part of it is that each of us have an individual responsibility. And so I think sometimes we expect the government to make decisions for us, or we expect these statutory bodies to implement certain things without understanding that each and every one of us have an individual responsibility first. And if you are not holding up your end of the individual responsibility, you can't be someone that is expecting too much from anyone higher up because you yourself are not holding up to it. And I think that's something that I've had to hold myself accountable for.
Mm.
I unfortunately, as you can see here, today's a hot day, so I was forced to buy a plastic bottle of water. In Belize, and so in Belize we have bag water, the plastic bag. And so I think we went viral once on the internet because like everyone's like, you guys have bag water, but yeah, so we have like plastic bags, and so there's a lot of plastics that go on. But for me, I think I've been trying to swap that out completely as my individual responsibility.
Yeah.
But more than that, it's understanding that you need to educate the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be the only one that understands the value of it.
Yeah.
There needs to be a responsibility that, okay, I know this information, so I need to hold my friends accountable as well.
Yeah.
And you create your own little community. It's more than just us creating a regional community, but of course, wherever you live, you can create your own community as well that understands that, hey, the little things that we do will end up impacting on a greater scale.
100%. All right, I guess that was the final question. I noticed that in your bio it said that you are a devoted Harry Potter fan.
That sounds correct. Yes. I'm very devoted. An entire Slytherin.
But here's the thing though. I'm actually a fan as well. I read the books. I've read all the books and stuff, but there is actually one very humanitarian character in the story that is always standing up for the rights of people. Would you would you like to take a stab at telling our audience who that might be?
The more you're talking about it, I'm thinking about Hermione Granger because she's wonderful. Hermione is wonderful. She was the epitome of what it meant to stand up for people.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that I always admired about her was that she didn't allow her intelligence to make her arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, she allowed her intelligence to make her empathetic to the things around her.
Yeah, I mean,
and so that was it for me. I think everyone loved Hermione. We will never have another Hermione Granger.
Yeah, I mean, I think people like Harry probably found her, though it think a bit annoying sometimes, but for sure, I think she was probably the most conscientious one, and a lot of the times she was the one that ended up saving them. But the thing that a lot of people who watch the movies don't know is that she actually started a movement to save the house elves who are actual slaves. So she's a real humanitarian on the show. And I'm sure
it's important for everyone to find their niche. Like, I think that's a big part of it. To be a person that makes a difference, you need to find a niche that works for you.
True.
And you go for it.
100%. I dare to think that she would be a climate change activist as well, if the book had.
Of course.
But yeah, thanks so much for joining us today and for sharing your experience. And yeah, we hope to see some more of your stories. Where can people find and locate you? Hopefully, you'll be doing more of this kind of reporting.
All right, so I work for Love FM in Belize.
Mhm.
Love FM, Love TV, RSV Limited, all one
So
umbrella.
you know Hippolyta.
Ah,
Hippolyta
yes,
co-worker,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And so I work for Love. If you have Instagram, you can always follow me on Instagram at the Jolly Rancher. You can shoot me a message anytime. I will always respond. And of course, I love building community. So if that's your thing, we can always connect
Mhm.
and basically feed off of each other. It's ideas are important, and so it's important that we all feed off of each other.
Agreed. All right, well, yeah, thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash podcast. It's been great. I'm your host, and this was Jaleeza Roberts. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.